Happy Wisdom Wednesday, everyone. And if you haven't noticed, I'm not at home anymore. I'm actually overseas in Turkey.
Olsun varsın ah çekinme, sen yine yalanlar söyle, paramparça.
Spending some time visiting my family here. So that should not delay the book of the week. And the book of the week is Niche Down: How to Become Legendary by Being Different by Christopher Lochhead and Heather Clancy. Now, you might recognize one of the authors, Christopher Lochhead, as he was one of the authors of Play Bigger, which first introduced this concept around category design. And Niche Down is a book that takes that concept a little bit further with more case studies and more specifically a great approach to how you should think about category design, which in part is niching down or finding your niche. Now, why is that important? Well, let's start out with somebody who actually really understood marketing pretty well almost 100 years ago, and that's Albert Einstein. And what Einstein said is that if he has a problem to solve, he's going to spend about 55 minutes thinking about the problem and then 5 minutes thinking about solutions. And when we think about ourselves, whether you're a consumer or an executive looking for some kind of business software, we categorize our problems. When you go to the grocery store, you don't immediately think, hey, I need Dogfish Head beer. Maybe you do, but even when you're there, you look for the category, the craft beer category, right? And the dumb thing that you can do in business, especially in a startup, is decide to go into an existing category and try to be number one. You have to be different because evolutionarily, that's how our minds are programmed, right? Our brains are still primitive. They have not changed in the last, thousands of years. So when we go outside, our mind pays attention to changes in the clouds, ruffling of the leaves, right? Because if those are the same as they always are, right, then we don't really pay attention to them until they change, right? And it's the same thing when you think about a category. Now, if we go back in marketing history, this was first talked about not as a category, but really under the law of leadership in the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Al Ries and Jack Trout, written over 40 years ago. That was further enhanced by the classic Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. And in that book where Geoffrey Moore talks about the technology adoption curve and of course the importance of early adopters and innovators, he mentions find a beachhead to dominate. Very much like in World War II where the beaches of Normandy was stormed. As a startup, you have to find a beachhead to own, and that's essentially what Christopher and Heather are talking about in Niche Down. You have to niche down, you have to get focused and specified and find a niche to own. And when you look at all these business examples, that's exactly what they did. The BlackBerry solved the problem of using email and mobile phone. When Apple decided to create a smartphone, which is a completely different category, Steve Jobs did not solve how do we make mobile emailing better. He solved a completely different problem and categorized it, which is how do you live a mobile life? And that's where the smartphone was found, right? And one thing that you have to keep in mind as a startup is that category design is not something you do later on. While you're developing the product, the company, you also develop the category, otherwise known as the category triangle, because most startups compete along those first two dimensions. The product, which is how a problem is to be solved, and then the company, which is how do we want our organization to function, right? But the category specifically focuses on how you want the market to start thinking about a problem. And that's really what category design is about. It's about using new language to think and perceive an old problem in a new way. And of course, your solution ends up being that bridge. But category design is not about your product. It's about a point of view, right? And that point of view is being empathetic and understanding what's the point of view of the customer and what's the point of view of how we should look at this problem. Right? If you look at one of my favorite category design examples, which is 5-Hour Energy Drink, some brilliant man came along and said, if I wanted an energy drink, but I'm not that thirsty, what should I have? Did he make a small energy drink? No, he made an energy shot. So instead of forcing a comparison, right? Do I want a big energy drink? Do I want a small energy drink? And comparing the two, he forced a choice, which is, Do I want an energy drink or do I want this energy shot? And to make it even more dramatic, decided to have it unrefrigerated at the very front of the store at a slightly higher price. That's forcing a choice, because when you force a comparison by being a better product, that's when you get into pricing comparisons, feature comparisons, and that's not how you become a billion-dollar unicorn. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that in this book, they have a section, which, by the way, I love the book because what they do is, as they tell these case studies, they bold and italicize key points and quotes, which I really love when a book does that. And of course, I still highlight. But one of those things is that category design is about making demand, very important, versus branding is about fighting for demand. And there's a key distinction there, right? When you brand, you're trying to get attention. But when you do category design, you're making demand because you're going to a completely green field where nobody even exists or knows about, and you are attracting people there. And that's how I think the beachhead analogy applies from Crossing the Chasm, which is you're trying to find a way to attract early adopters and innovators. Very difficult to do that if you're going into an existing category and trying to just be better versus going into a completely brand new category that does not exist. You evangelize that problem, right, and the solution around it, and a point of view which attracts those early adopters because they say, hey, that's something completely different, right? And when something's completely different, you can't really compare it, right? When Netflix came out, right, and started delivering DVDs at home, there's not a comparison to Blockbuster, right? If you remember those Netflix days, that was a choice, which is, do I want to go to the store or do I want to just stay at home? That's how you should think about it. So I highly recommend this book. Very short, and I love books that are written like this because not a lot of fluff, gets straight to the point, very clear writing and easy to read. You can read this over a weekend. So that's your book of the week. Happy Wisdom Wednesday, and as always, I'll see you next week. Stay safe and be legendary. Bye for now.